Stocks never sleep. And after a scrimmage on a Saturday, we've got to get right into a market-moving Monday on the beat, presented by the Waterworks. That's Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. Yes, the schedule has changed. There will be a Bourne Blitz later this week, but boy, when there's movement going on, depth chart, position battles, scrimmages, tackling, even if we don't see it, we got to talk about it.
You have to believe it exists.
I believe.
Now, stock watches are interesting things because I don't want to sit here and pat ourselves on the back. Because
you want me to pat you on the back?
I think that people at times assume that there's insider trading going on, and sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it's not. And in this instance, specifically last week when I started asking about the possibility of a closer than people would ever expect competition between Tavian St. Clair and Luke Fahey to be this team's backup quarterback in 2026, there was no insider trading there. I just saw what I saw.
Yeah.
And when you see it, and you see how the offense is supposed to go, and you see what it looks like when people who are running it understand it in a different way, it is easy to see the difference. And that's, again, not to in any way denigrate Tavian St. Clair and his development curve. I just thought that it was an important time to bring up to people after 3 training camp practices. There was something different about the way the offense looked with Luke Fahey running it than when it was with Tavian St. Clair running it. It's not to say Tavian can't fix it, not to say Tavian won't fix it, not to say Tavian's physical talents aren't going to eventually carry him over anyway. But I thought that Luke Fahey is where we have to start because that entire press conference on Saturday with Ryan Day, there were very few things that I think would be revelatory for people.
Well, that
should be, because it is not really about 2026. It's about the conversation we've been having for the last 6 months about 2027. And
but he also made it about 2026, if we're being honest about what he said.
True.
If that battle is tighter, and that's also because you mentioned it, a couple times last week in the build up to the scrimmage, and from the outside, saw what you saw, but still remained skeptical about the possibility of that actually happening and a shake up to the pecking order at quarterback. That's what I want to ask Ryan Day about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, is this about, a continued challenge to Tavian St. Clair, lighting a fire under him? And I thought maybe he would go down that road, but instead he said, no, he immediately talked about Luke Fahey and all the positives that he's done, his processing, his decision-making, and said that, that is a real thing. So that's a no accidents, intentional Ryan Day. You take that at face value. Now, does that still mean that I think that's likely to happen, that Tavian St. Clair is going to be passed by Luke Fahey in the next 2 or 3 weeks? I would say I don't feel that way, but clearly this is different than I imagined, and probably different than Billy Fessler and Ryan Day thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, Julian Sain obviously is a different level of quarterback. He lost his black stripe on like April 8th or something, a month into being at Ohio State. That is not the case for Luke Fahey here. It's August 15th when he loses it, but that the timing of that is not coincidental. It's Ohio State's first scrimmage. He obviously performed very, very well in the scrimmage. Ryan Day on Saturday said that he was going to have to go through, and Billy Fessler handles all the grades for the quarterbacks. It clearly was enough from the naked eye on Saturday in the scrimmage situation to make people go, okay, let's stop dilly-dallying here and give Luke the respect that he deserves. And there were a lot of people at Ohio State a year ago when they recruited Luke Fahey who said if he was 2 inches taller, if he was 6'2" instead of 5'10", so that's 4 inches taller, whatever. I'm not good at math, but whatever that magic number is, if he's Julian Sain's height, people would have been talking about Luke Fahey completely differently. And
if ands and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas.
Sure, of course. But Russell Wilson is Russell Wilson sized. He's bite sized. And Arthur Smith worked with Russell Wilson. He knows how to get the best out of those guys. And it was throughout the week whenever we were in the building, it's like, hey, am I reading this wrong? And multiple times they wouldn't say, no, you're not. They wouldn't say, yes, you are. They'd say, boy, we really like Luke Fahey. We really like what we've seen out of Luke Fahey. And that is ultimately why I've started to feel more and more confident about pushing the envelope about that conversation, because it seems nothing, as you said, as we say, there is no accidents. It's all intentional. So whatever the intentionality is, sometimes, as we've heard in the conversation around Bo Jackson, for example, in the first couple of weeks of practice, you can almost tell that it's like fire under a butt conversation. That did not feel the same for what Ryan Day said about Luke Fahey on Saturday.
No, because the answer didn't really include anything about Tavian St. Clair.
No, I'm gonna play the audio of that, the video of that, just so people can see it, and then we can go back to it. But I think it's important that people actually hear what Ryan Day said.
I think, Luke, he got his black stripe off today. He's been really doing a great job. He's putting a lot of pressure on Tavian. He really is. He's been competing. He's been making plays. We'll see how he grades out. Coach Fessler grades everything. So that's been exciting to see him, come in with a certain work ethic, run the offense, at a pretty high level. So we'll kind of see how the rest of the camp plays out, but good to see him kind of step in and push Tavian.
So, that's from Ryan Day. Rule number one of the beat, the Austin Birm Show, is that everything he says is done on purpose. I don't recall a time that I ever felt like we were being lied to, misled by that. So if you're talking about stocks, and I think it's interesting, you said this is primarily about 2027. And I think I agree, and I understand why you say that, because they have to make a decision about where they're going to go. If they're going to be involved in the transfer portal, it seems like they probably will no matter what. If Julian Sayin does depart for the NFL, you need to have some idea of what the lay of the land is at quarterback returning at that point. And you are already, I think, if you're Ryan Day and Mark Pantoni, doing the calculations on the back of the napkin and saying, what is this going to cost and what is the best allocation of resources? And there's part of me that also says, this is going to be practice number 10 and they have scrimmaged one time. It feels premature for that. Yep. But the window to actually evaluate
the backup quarterback
is closing pretty quickly. Like they're going to play on September 5th, an opener, and there might be reps available to the backup quarterback in that game or multiple quarterbacks. But after that, and against this difficult of a schedule, and when you're preparing Julian Sayin and that offense to get through 5 or 6 ranked opponents over the course of the year, it's not going to be time then to experiment in practice with Tavian St. Clair and Luke Fahey splitting reps. And it did seem also obvious by Ryan Day's answer that Justin Martin is not, realistically in that battle, not at this point, which, in some ways surprised me, in some ways it doesn't, given that he's started and played games at the Power 4 level. If you're looking for the backup quarterback, that sometimes gives you an advantage. But, you're looking at the physical tools of Tavian St. Clair and the mental processing of Luke Fahey, and then projecting forward that what that means. Someone is going to have to take that number 2 role in 2026, and then that does alter the course potentially for what 2027 looks like.
Yeah, because this is, as you mentioned, the window where you have your surefire number 1 quarterback. Julian Sayin's your guy. These couple weeks are about evaluating these other players, and you're not going to get the opportunity if you're Tavian St. Clair or Luke Fahey in October to really go out there and win the backup quarterback job. You might be able to lose it, but I don't think it's a situation where you go out and just take it from someone at practice. But beyond that, this is probably, it very likely ends up being a scenario similar to last spring, where there's conversation about, okay, this battle is a lot closer than we think, but eventually Julian Sayin's going to pull away and win it. Sometimes talent supersedes all in sports. We all know that. Tavian St. Clair's physical talents are extreme. Now he's just got to figure out a way to put it all into the same mold that Ohio State needs him to be, because ultimately quarterback is not a freelance position, and you're going to have to go out there and know the offense and run the offense.
Yeah, I thought... And
there's high-level concepts, man. These are NFL concepts that are being taught
100%
to a kid that has played at Bell Fountain High School a year ago. So, let's not use it as a way to bash anybody, but just say, we'll see what happens. But clearly Luke Fahey deserves the credit that he's been given, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game with one up and the other's going down. If Tavian St. Clair, snaps into gear in scrimmage number 2 and the game starts slowing down, the picture looks more clear to him, you stand them side by side and you watch them throw in 7-on-7, routes on air. it's pretty obvious who you're going to pick in that scenario. So if he's able to if Tavian St. Clair is able to start doing some of the things mentally that Luke Fahey has shown a knack for and an ability to handle early in his career, well, that closes that door entirely,
right?
Because everything else is right there.
That ultimately is why it's a worthwhile conversation, because we're trying to be fair to both sides here.
Yeah.
And Tavian has a lot of expectation on his shoulders. Luke Fahey came into Ohio State with zero expectations on his shoulders. Like, that is a different mentality altogether. I've said it on this show. I've said it on others. Tavian St. Clair deserves a ton of credit. He gets chewed out by Ryan Day more than any quarterback I've ever seen.
He's still leading, I think, the team in penalty laps.
And he is every time immediately back in line, immediately eye-to-eye contact, looking at Ryan Day and saying, okay, tell me what I need to do. Teach me. And that's why I wanted to ask Ryan Day on Saturday, with the opportunity to give Julian Sayin to Arthur Smith and Billy Fessler, is Ryan Day getting a much better look at the potential backup quarterback battle than he's ever had before. Because I think that he is going to be more hands-on with whoever the backup is, which is a complete 180 from how he's handled every year that he's been at Ohio State thus far. So I think it's interesting to have the backup conversation. That's right. Because like Ryan Day is seeing it more clearly than I think he's ever had the chance to, because he's not the one in the room necessarily with Julian Sayin and Billy Fessler. He's letting Arthur Smith do that.
I think you're seeing your meal planning more clearly than ever.
I'm seeing my a lot of things more clearly than ever, if you know what I mean. Because there's less in the way.
No, I don't.
Because there's less in the way. And Awaken 180 helped me feel a lot better about myself. If you go to awaken180weightloss.com, you're going to have an opportunity to change your life by changing the way you think about food, changing the way you eat your food, changing the way that food makes you feel when you eat it. You know what the worst part about fast food is? How good it tastes as soon as you eat it, and then how bad you feel as soon as you're done.
Yeah, no doubt.
And it's like the exact opposite sometimes when you eat healthy, when you're doing meal replacement. But Awaken 180 has excellent food options, excellent app support, excellent coaching that sticks with you for the rest of your life once you're in the program. Go to awaken180weightloss.com. Start your own journey. I lost 40 pounds in 8 weeks. He lost 40 pounds in 8 weeks. You can do the same thing.
I didn't know that I was already at the live show and dealing with you and Bobby Carpenter. Seasons change. Comfort doesn't. Call the Waterworks and Hetter Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing for maintenance, installation, and repairs, or visit online at thewaterworks.com. The Waterworks and Hetter Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing, proud sponsor of Ohio State Athletics. All right, so that's the quarterback scenario, backup quarterback scenario. Things are pretty secure with Julian Sayin at the top, who apparently can handle weather just fine. We already knew that based on the way he played in the Big House last year and that win in the rivalry. I think naturally, and we alluded to it on Snappy J's on Saturday, you have to talk about Bo Jackson. And I know that nationally there's never really been any question about this. They've all still been raving about Bo Jackson coming back a 1,000-yard season as a true freshman. But missing spring, having the summer that he did or didn't have, at least in comparison to Isaiah West and the discussion around him, starting training camp, working with the quote-unquote twos for a couple days, and then this shift 1 week later where Ryan Day is just almost over the top praising Bo Jackson. Now, with the caveat that he's still pointing out, it has to happen in a game. It has to happen with second level, whether you're running someone over or running around them, success that he didn't have a year ago. It's all still notable that he pointed that out publicly in a way that he hasn't before, while I think saying some of the part that was being, whispered a week ago. If you can get Bo Jackson going, there's special potential there. All these things were said into a microphone.
We were speaking to someone
1 week ago.
We're in the business of full disclosure here. We're recording this on Saturday afternoon after Ryan Day's press conference for Monday morning. A week ago, we had been told by someone close to the running backs, Bo Jackson is different. And we're like, yeah, but is he wanting to be different? And whatever happened in the last week clearly made a difference for Bo, because Ryan Day has been, I don't want to say critical of Bo since the offseason began.
I think you can say, based on his comments Saturday in the press conference, critical is absolutely the word for it.
He's not wanted to be publicly critical,
but he certainly finally did do that.
He crossed the Rubicon on Saturday afternoon saying, hey, this was just not there a year ago. And so if you get the best version of Bo, which is the player that Carlos Locklin, when Locke came to Ohio State, that was the guy that he zeroed in on. He zeroed in on two running backs. It was Isaiah West and Bo Jackson. Ohio State was recruiting others at the time, guys like Marquise Davis, who are now down at Louisville, who went to, I don't remember where he went, Missouri or something before that. So this was who he wanted. This was who Carlos Locklin wanted. He clearly believes in him. I think the interesting part about the Bo Jackson discussion and the Isaiah West discussion and the Jacoby Jackson discussion is that it's all housed under one umbrella, which is Carlos Locklin was challenged this offseason.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I think he knew was coming. I remember speaking to Carlos Locklin in maybe January, and he's like, it's really going to be about if my room is what I think it can be. And so thus far in his career, heading into year 3 at Ohio State, he walked into Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. That's pretty good. But he didn't have to really do anything with those guys. He made a decision to evaluate and prioritize and recruit Bo Jackson and Isaiah West. It's hard to argue with that, considering that year 1 for those guys ended up with nearly 1,500 total yards between the two of them. So now it's like, are they able to elevate? And if they are, then Carlos Locklin, you look at and you go, okay, this guy knows exactly what he's doing. If you see a stagnation at running back, or you see those guys not elevate their game, I think that there will be a segment of the fan base that will question whether or not Carlos Locklin, especially after the David Gabriel George thing, not landing him, even though that's not really his fault, people will start to murmur and wonder if he's like not evaluating it correctly. So it is pretty important, and I think that's why it was so valuable to hear Ryan Day on Saturday kind of start to give the praise back a little bit, because it is rare. It would have been commonplace in the Urban Meyer era to spend 9 months bashing one coach or one position group. That's what Urban would do. Ryan Day generally picks his spots and poke here, poke there, but not like a poke. And that's what we've seen since the end of the offseason, or since the start of the offseason to now. And it seems like Bo, but everyone, and Jacoby Jackson being the second guy mentioned. I heard he had a really, really good day on Saturday. That type of stuff is vital for Carlos Locklin and for the running backs in general.
Yeah, I think it was a big deal, and it was worth pointing out because the last week and a half has been almost nothing but nonstop praise and raising the ceiling for Isaiah West. Jacoby Jackson making an impact, and then just uncertainty. Like, I don't know how many times I've been asked, what's going on with Bo Jackson? Yeah. And that was hard to really know, because you missed the spring. That's fine. It wasn't his fault. You deal with injuries. You play as much as he did as a true freshman at Ohio State and for a national title contender. You're going to have bumps and bruises. That's fine. He earned, I think, an opportunity to recover from that. But there just wasn't anything else that felt like the needle was moving over June and July. And then that was seemingly, that narrative was reinforced by his role and the snaps that he was getting in those first 3 days when everyone could see it. But as I said a week ago, there's a long way to go.
Yeah. And
then a week later, these practices are better. He wasn't the starting running back in August of a year, training camp last year as a true freshman. That was a continued elevation.
But there was a belief then that he was the best running back in the room. And that belief has maintained through the year, but through this offseason, but it's still been like, well, it doesn't matter if you are or aren't, if you aren't.
Yep. With great power
comes great responsibility. You should put that on a tombstone, or a placard of some sort.
Who died?
May.
Oh,
Aunt May.
That's
and Uncle Ben.
Rest in peace to a real one. That covers your weekly superhero talk on the Stock Watch.
You're welcome, America.
I think I mentioned this on Saturday just briefly, but I would reiterate that if there were concerns about Jermaine Matthews, I don't know that you have to have those.
Yeah, I don't think that there should have been concerns about Jermaine Matthews. We said it on Snap Judgments last Saturday. He had been dealing with a little soreness at the start of training camp, which is why we were seeing more Dominic Kelly. It had nothing to do with Jermaine Matthews or his output. It was just hey, let's not push the needle too far or move the needle too far for a guy that has played a ton of football. So Jermaine Matthews is there. I don't want to gloss over it, but if you gave away Jermaine stock, ask for it back.
That's why I bring it up, because there was understandably a dip coming out of those first couple of days.
Buy the dip, folks.
And
that's a stock term.
That's load up, because that needle's going to keep going back up, I think. And if we're using it as an actual stock watch, those first couple of days where he's not out there, and he was still practicing, which I think made it even harder to really wrap your mind around. It's like Dominic Kelly's out there, and then Jermaine is working with the twos. Or on one day he's out there and he's working at nickel. And none of that stuff, the nickel, I don't think should be as a surprise. He's
people
clearly
should be asking for that.
He's the contingency plan, no doubt. And you could make a legitimate case, I think, that it could be more than that. Now that's Jay Timmons, Terry Moore relying on some of that. You don't want to break that glass in case of emergency with moving Jermaine from corner to nickel unless you have to, I think. But when I say that if there were concerns, some of it was us trying to figure out what exactly was going on. And if the health thing lingers, whatever, maybe it won't bounce back to the level we think. But the way Jermaine has been bouncing around, the discussion about him, I think, is at a level that should be really encouraging again, because partnering that with Devin Sanchez, who is on a rocket ship, you can't just have one good corner if you're going to win a national championship.
No, I think that Ohio State fans should be optimistic that they have a handful, and that the reps Dominic Kelly was getting in place of Jermaine Matthews for those first couple days will only be helpful to him. Ryan Day talked about it with the offensive line on Saturday during his press conference. Like, it sucks that Austin Saraveld missed a couple days, but now it's opened the door for some other guys to get reps they maybe otherwise wouldn't, like Carter Lowe on Saturday during the scrimmage having to go against the first team defensive line. So like those aren't moments that are always going to look great, but they're positive regardless. And I thought I was trying to read between some lines from Ryan Day on Saturday when he was asked about, I think it was Tony Girdman asked about freshmen who are first-year players who they think will contribute this year. And when he got to the defense, Ryan Day mentioned Jay Timmons, which is not a surprise to anybody who listens to the show. We've been saying it for months that he's going to play a significant role. Then he said some of the young guys up front will play. And I was like, I don't know what that means.
I think it means that what we saw from Kyrie Wilder is real.
That's what I'm getting. It's Saturday afternoon. By the time this airs, I think like Kyrie Wilder's black stripe has been removed on Saturday as well. Like that's when you start to be like, and it's not necessarily just like, we'll look at this 5-star, we have to do this. The physicality that Kyrie Wilder brings, the way he looks is different. I don't know what it means for Zion Grady. I don't know what it means for Quaver Saw or Epi Satanale or anybody else. What I do know is that Ohio State would love to get to 5 or 6 defensive ends who can contribute. And if Kyrie Wilder, if the light comes on and stays on, which is always the challenge for first-year players, especially first-year players from parts unknown and coming from 3,000 miles away and all of the adjustments that have to happen when you go from California to Ohio for college, there is a real argument of the defensive ends on this roster that outside of Kenyatta Jackson, Kyrie Wilder is probably the most natural, like, game wrecker if he's at his peak.
Pass rush
threat. He is that guy, and he is really, really athletic. And so it's not surprising that as Matt Patricia and Larry Johnson start to figure out exactly what motivates him, that they are starting to see results. And so Kyrie Wilder, again, stock watches are always kind of hard because we're projecting ahead. It's not necessarily about this season. But if Kyrie Wilder can work his way into the top 4 at defensive end by the end of this season, that would be a pretty substantial move, I think.
Yeah, no doubt. And, we know that Larry Johnson believes in him, and we know that he believes in rotating. So anyone who earns those opportunities will get them for Ohio State. And
no more red shirts. You got to play or you got to leave.
Play or not. But, we're still in some ways wrapping our minds not just around the red shirt scenario, but in this era where you're going to play 16 games, the traditional depth charts don't apply, especially as we talk about Matt Patricia and his defense. You play 16 games, play as many players as possible to survive that, stay fresh, whatever. For all of the hand-wringing that we did, at least on this show, about Larry Johnson and rotating and maybe doing it at the wrong time, you cannot survive anymore with just 2 defensive ends and just 2 defensive tackles.
Not 16 games if you want to play that many, and it just doesn't work.
You need a game-ready unit full of 10 players to and I think that they're getting close to that.
Yeah, maybe it's hindsight, maybe it's revisionist history. I think the issue with the rotation at defensive end was always like, why are you doing it in the key moments
the situation
of the game?
It was, and I tried to make that clear in the moment when we were talking about
like when you have Jack and JT, why are you replacing them in key moments of a game with guys who are clearly not on their level? When you have 5 or 6 guys that are all pretty much the same, that's a totally different
100%.
conversation.
Yeah.
So that was not the case in 23 when this conversation was really percolating all the time. Like, what are we doing this for?
Yeah.
Just to put other guys in the game just because you were trying to manage egos. Like that if everyone's fairly similar on the field, then fine, rotate away. But when it's different, and I think that it's closer to everyone being fairly similar right now. Even Kenyatta Jackson, who there's a lot of expectations. I think that they are probably a lot of hope that he becomes what everyone thinks he should be, not necessarily rooted on what he's actually done thus far to separate or earn himself for the distinction of saying, like, that guy has to be on the field. I just don't think that's the case.
Yeah, for sure. There's still a lot of work to be done on both sides of the football. Buckeyes are hitting double digits with practice number 10, past the midway point of August, and that opener is closing in. We will hear from a handful of players on Wednesday and Thursday. We'll be at Roosters for the live show later on Monday, talking Tuesday on deck, tomorrow on the beat. And then we'll get Zach Bourne in later to hear some of his thoughts about what's been going on in training camp so far. So it's still going to be a busy week, even with a limited number of opportunities to get out there and no practice for us to actually watch. But we will keep our ears to the ground, as we always do, on the beat, presented by the Waterworks. Thanks for joining us on this Market Moving Monday. He's Birm. I'm Austin. We'll talk to you later.